Alright, so thank you for tuning into Chompin at the Bit. I am Kyle Edwards, of course, and this is episode number 83. So, with this episode, I kind of want to look at something that Kevin Garnett said was about a week ago. He said that, actually, I should probably get his actual quote, but he basically said that players from 20 years ago would struggle in today's game. And I mean, I can't be too mad at that because, of course, not every player from 20 years ago could play today. Because, you know, your guys who are on the back end of your roster would probably have been phased out, of course. But I did want to kind of take a look at that and maybe look at it from more the aspect of the big name players, because I'm assuming that's who he was talking about. Because otherwise, I don't see the point of making the comment if you're going to talk about, you know, guy 14 or 15 on your roster. Now, he didn't name names, which, I mean, would have been great if he did. But I'm going to sit here and I guess go through some 90s people who I think would have, you know, flourished today. And I do actually think that there are some well-known 90s players who may not necessarily struggled today, but probably wouldn't be remembered the same way. They might have been a little bit more marginalized today's game than they were back then. I mean, once I get to them, I'll kind of explain it a little bit. You'll understand. So he said 20 years. That'd be what, 2001. I kind of took that to be, I guess, his time, because he came into the league. I believe, well, Garnett came in the 90s. Did he come in like 95? Yeah, he came in 95. So I was figuring I could probably use that as kind of a reference for his 20 years ago. Because, I mean, 95, you're looking at 26 years ago. I mean, I'm not splitting hairs here. So, so I'll take a look at it from, I guess, mid-90s guys. So I do think it is really interesting that it seems like 90s basketball gets kind of diminished with like new age, I guess, fans and all that. And I do kind of think about it because I think the 80s is probably getting more and more forgotten the further we go. Like, you remember, you know, Bird, Magic, and I think those two will be remembered, you know, from here on out. But I think as the fan base or whatever gets younger and younger, of course it's going to happen that, you know, history falls further and further behind. But it does seem like the 90s is kind of going through that. I do have a theory as to why that is. Maybe it's a conspiracy theory. I don't know. But we all know that in today's NBA, it's all about LeBron. And because of that, LeBron obviously gets compared to Jordan. Jordan ran the 90s. And if you've had these conversations like I have, if you talk to a LeBron, diehard LeBron fan, probably 75% of them will tell you that Jordan didn't play against anybody, and that's why LeBron's better. Which I always laugh at because, I mean, yeah, I grew up on 90s basketball, and there's plenty of guys back then that would have been just as good if they played today. But I do think it's because of that kind of LeBron sentiment that the 90s gets pushed down the ladder. And I mean, I get it. You know, you're a fan of who you're a fan of, and you can kind of twist the numbers and parameters of your argument to fit your guy, to make your guy look better. I get that. But I think if you look at it objectively, there's actually a lot from the 90s that probably, you know, the game could use today's game. So I guess I'll touch on that before getting into certain players. So if you think about 90s basketball, what's it all about? It was all about physical defense, which I think is something that should come back today. And I do think because of that, there's a lot of guys in the 90s whose numbers might have been pretty run-of-the-mill, who if you put them in today would have been stars in today's game. Because in the 90s you could hand check, which allowed defenders to, you know, better guide offensive players and stay in front of them. Don't have that now. That's an automatic whistle. You had legit big men back then. Now, I do think some of the big men back then would have struggled in today's game because of the speed and the pace of the game. But, you know, guys like, let's see, like Patrick Ewing. Classic case. Patrick Ewing's a guy who would have worked today because he was a big man who could space the floor. And this, in this era of, you know, spacing, three-pointers, big men who could stretch the floor, Patrick Ewing would have killed it today. Back in the 90s, he was really good in the 90s as well. But in the 90s, he was kind of more of your, you know, down low amongst the trees with the other big men. He was a rim protector. And, you know, he would go out a little bit, but I think today's game, he'd probably be out mid-range, kind of deep two area a lot more. So yeah, the big man was different back then than it is today. You also had, I would say, more traditional point guards in the 90s than you do today. I mean, today you have a lot of point guards who are big-time scorers for your team, like Lillard, Steph Curry, Kyrie Irving. You know, guys like that mold. Whereas back then you had your Jason Kidds, Steve Nash, guys who were big assist guys. And Steve Nash could put up some points, but, I mean, he was more of your table setter for the other players and would hit the occasional, you know, open three or whatever. I think that's kind of the biggest things. Well, another thing from the 90s that today's game could use is rivalries. Because if you think 90s basketball, what do you automatically think about? Bulls, Heat, Knicks, Knicks, Bulls, Pacers, Knicks. I think I'm naming all Eastern Conference. There's some good Western Conference rivalries. Oh, Lakers, Kings. The Sonics and the, I want to say the Suns had a good rivalry back then. But either way, rivalries and that kind of underlining hatred between teams, I would love to see that come back in today's game. I don't think it will. I mean, you have some guys who are kind of like that, where I think Giannis is one of those guys where he's kind of come out and said, you know, once the ball's tipped, he's not really one to be friends with the opposing team, which I appreciate. But yeah, but now it's like, maybe it's with, well, I think part of it is today you have more player movement. So because of that, you know, you have a guy you played with for like 3 years, you became buddies with, he leaves, goes to another team. obviously you're still going to be pretty friendly. So then, that's kind of what's led to that around the league. But yeah, so there's a kind of the big differences in the two eras. And oh yeah, I just remembered. I kind of teased this a while ago, the whole LeBron versus Jordan talk. I will do that, I think, at some point this week. So stay tuned for that. But yeah, so looking at some players from the 90s that I think kind of go against what Garnett was saying. And, the old adage is like great players from every era could play in any other era. For the most part, I do agree with that. But, looking at some of the guys who were big names in the 90s, like a David Robinson. Could you imagine David Robinson today? Like in the 90s, David Robinson was, I want to say, kind of an anomaly because he was a big man who was like real slender compared to some of the other big men back then. But he was real athletic. He could block shots. You could give him the ball in the post. He could make moves. He could score. He could shoot in the mid-range. I think later in his career, he kind of expanded his range to a little deeper. I think he even hit the occasional three or whatever. But he was I think he was a good free throw shooter. And I mean, yeah, you look at some of his numbers. Let's see. So yeah, in the 90s, he averaged 25 points, 12 rebounds, 3.5 blocks. I mean, those numbers translate anywhere. And he, like I said, would be able to handle the speed of some of the centers of today. He could guard, your small four men who play center. He could guard those guys, so he would have fit today's game seamlessly. Karmalone. Malone is a guy that interests me. I wasn't the biggest Karmalone guy back in the day. I don't even know what it was. It was just something about his game I didn't fully, I don't want to say appreciate, because what is he, like the number 2 scorer of all time or something like that? So clearly, he got buckets, but I don't know. There's something about him. And I don't even think my opinion of him would change if he actually had gotten a ring, since he didn't have the chance to do that. I mean, he got the one opportunity. Was it 2 opportunities, I think, against the Bulls and lost. But, he and Stockton, Stockton's a guy who I think, Stockton could have played today. I think Stockton's one of those guys who probably was held back by the era, because in the 90s, those Utah Jazz teams were all slow pace, pick and roll, he and Malone, or like the Hornacek off the screen type stuff. And a lot of times Stockton was the forgotten guy in offense and really only took shots end of the shot clock when he had to. But he was actually a pretty good shooter. So I think in today's more open game, he would have been a guy who would have scored more today's NBA than he actually did back then. So he actually would have benefited more playing today. Malone, I think, would have... the hardest thing with comparing it is, I guess you figure Malone would probably adapt his game to today's game. But I'm going to kind of keep it as what they were. So Malone was a guy who was pretty much strictly mid-range pull-up guy. He would post a little bit, but it was mainly to shoot a fadeaway over his, I think he faded away over his right shoulder most of the time. I mean, he's not a guy who had handles, so you don't have to worry about that. I mean, he averaged, 27 and 10 in his MVP year. I don't know if he would have put up those numbers today. I mean, I just say he couldn't play today, of course, but because he could run the floor, so that would help him. I'm trying to think like who in today's game he might emulate. I'll have to think about that. Like, for some reason, just thinking about it, I was thinking of like Detroit Piston Blake Griffin. If you've seen Blake Griffin play recently, he's not the high flying guy from the Clippers. He's more of your mid-range pull-up 3-point guy. Now, Karmalone didn't have a 3-point shot back then, but wasn't expected. I wonder if Malone would have been a corner 3 type of guy today's game. Like I said, for some reason I just thought Blake Griffin. I don't even know if that works, but just for the purpose of this, we'll stick with that for now. But yeah, Malone's an interesting case. I may have to come back to that one. I mean, Jordan, we all know. Guys like Jordan, yeah, Jordan would have been great today's game. I mean, with all the physicality of defenses back then, he was averaging 30 points a game easy. I know the thinking is Jordan would have averaged like 50 today. I mean, that's kind of ridiculous, but yeah, he would have put up crazy numbers today. Yeah, because today you also get a lot of isolation ball, which he played then. And I mean, he killed it back then, so why not today with even more space in the paint? So yeah, he's fine. Barkley. I guess it would depend on which Barkley you get. Like Phoenix Suns Barkley, yeah, would have been great today. Once he got to Houston, I can't really remember him in Houston. I know he was like a little bigger in Houston, so he might have struggled a little bit in today's game, especially defensively against some quicker, more athletic guys. But yeah, Phoenix Suns, when he, got his MVP and he led that Suns team to the finals against the Bulls. Yeah, that Barkley era would have definitely been able to handle today's game. Like I said, I'm probably just going with some of the big. I'll probably do some, not necessarily lesser known, but Pippen. I did just talk about Jordan, made me think of Pippen. I mean, Pippen could have played today easily. Pippen would have been your a prototypical small ball, probably 5. And, he's the guy who would have been able to guard 1 through small ball 5. So he probably would have been even more of a star today. I do think Pippen does get kind of crapped on back then. Only because, with all Jordan stuff, Pippen is just seen as the Robin to the Batman and all that. But, I mean, if you look at it, Pippen was a really good player. I mean, those years when where did he go? Like to the Blazers after he left the Bulls. I think he was actually pretty decent then. Then he went chasing some rings with the Rockets later in his career. Like I said, that was later in his career. That wasn't really much of anything. But yeah, Pippen's a guy who would seamlessly transition into today's game. He was a small forward back then. He'd be a point forward today easily. He would be a trying to think of point forwards. You have like LeBron. He wasn't as big as LeBron. Tatum. It's actually interesting. I mean, could Scottie Pippen be? I don't know. I probably have to think more about these comparisons because there's so many guys today. But yeah, like I said, Pippen easily would have played today. How about Shawn Kemp? I mean, hopefully you guys know who Shawn Kemp is. I mean, Shawn Kemp was one of my favorite players to watch in the 90s. And just to give you some point of reference, think of Shawn Kemp as... Like Shawn Kemp is, I mean, it may sound crazy, but you could look at Shawn Kemp and then look at Zion. They were both guys who, I mean, attacked the rim with no regard. Although, I mean, Kemp, oh yeah, I mean, both of them could post up, spin, move you, take you to the hoop, dunk on you. I think Kemp was more willing to take a mid-range jumper. I don't really see Zion do a lot of that. That's probably because he's usually bigger than the guy who's guarding him, so he can back him down and overpower him. But yeah, so Shawn Kemp is probably one of the guys I should focus on for this argument because Kemp is I actually don't know what Kemp is regarded as today. I feel like I don't hear a lot of people talk about him, but if you go YouTube, pull up he and Gary Payton on the Sonics and watch some highlights, then you'll know what I'm talking about. Shawn Kemp was a great player back then. And today he'd work today too. I feel like what I'm establishing here is that, you know, maybe there were some guys who might struggle today, but for the most part, I think it'd all be great. So I'm thinking Kemp. I was thinking about Olajuwon. He's another guy where I don't know how, you know, well he's remembered today, but Olajuwon was legit back then. He was you could say he was basically a guard trapped in a center's body. He had great footwork, and against big men he had way better handles than most of them did. He had ridiculous moves. I mean, you know about the dream shake, hopefully. And yeah, he's a guy who would have dominated today's game because he had mid-range jumper. I could just set all the moves on the box. Rim protector. got rebounds. I mean, he gave a lot of big men a lot of work. Let me see. 90s, 24, 12, and 3.5 blocks. Wow. And he got 2 rings, so. Drexler, no, I'm not going to count him because he played with Olajuwon, but well, I mean, he did play into the 90s. He's on the Rockets, and I more remember Drexler as the guy on Portland from the late 80s. And the very first couple of years in the 90s, so I'm not really going to count him for this. Reggie Miller. There's a guy. Now, I mean, Reggie Miller was a big time star of the 90s, and he would have easily played today. I guess depending on what team he was on, I mean, he would have probably just murdered people from the 3-point line. I mean, he shot 40. I think he shot about 40% from 3. Only thing I'd have to think about is because they've moved the 3-point line so many times. That's has to be a good thing to look at, but I'll look at that later. Because one thing about the 90s was, I think David Stern to increase. How did it go? I think the 3-point line was close, and because of that, not a lot of people shot the 3. Because with the closer 3-point line, the spacing was more compact, and guys weren't really able to get open 3s, so they didn't take a lot of them. And then David Stern probably pushed the 3-point line out a little bit to create more space. And then you saw a little bit of an uptick in scoring in the 90s. And I don't know how that 3-point line compares to today. I'm trying to think when was the last time they moved the 3-point line. Well, either way. Yeah, guys like Reggie Miller. So your 3-point specialist, like Reggie Miller. I was going to say Ray Allen, but actually, Milwaukee Buck Ray Allen was way more than a 3-point shooter. He was actually a drive to the hoop, dunk on people guy in the mid-90s with Milwaukee. But I mean, instead of just rambling on about a bunch of players, because like I said, if you actually sit back and think about it, a lot of guys from the 90s would have been just fine today. The only people I would worry about are your slower big men. So I was going to say Mutombo, but I feel like Mutombo probably would have just became maybe a less athletic Rudy Gobert, where Mutombo would just be on your team for defensive purposes, and whatever you got from him offensively would be from offensive rebounds or, guard drives into the lane, kicks to him. Like your Vlade Divacs and stuff like that. Even Vlade was like a point center back then. And because of his passing ability, he would be fine today. So I think with KG's comments, the only people I could really think are big men. Because a lot of the guards and stuff, I mean, you're going to tell me Tim Hardaway couldn't play today? Which low-key, Tim Hardaway was another guy who I loved watching play. And actually because of him, quick story here. When I played basketball, his crossover was the crossover I loved using. Once again, if you don't know Tim Hardaway's crossover, go to YouTube. He had that quick little like sidestep and then bring it from right to left real quick in front of the guy and go around him. That was the crossover I used all the time. So yeah, I didn't try the Iverson crossover or nothing like that. Tim Hardaway was the guy I watched all the time. Even though, since I was kind of tall for my age, anytime I played, I was usually a big man, but I was a guard at heart, and I always wanted to be Tim Hardaway. But yeah, like even looking back, a guy like Dennis Rodman. You telling me Rodman couldn't play today? Dennis Rodman would literally be... Actually, who's this comparable? See, I was going to say Draymond Green, but Rodman rebounds way more than Draymond does. And even though Rodman didn't shoot the ball, he actually could shoot a little bit. It was the weirdest thing. I mean, he'd have games where you'd see like 5 points, 25 rebounds, and you'd be like, let's see, how much did he actually average? 9.8 points, 19 rebounds. So there you go. I mean, he was an interesting guy. Oh wait, that's not his. That was when he was an all-star. Yeah, career average 6.8 points, 15 rebounds a game. I actually wasn't. Well, I mean, I was kind of crazy with the 25 rebounds, but you get what I'm saying. So I guess, yeah, he'd kind of be Draymond Green today. I mean, Draymond doesn't score that much, but maybe not Draymond Green. I don't know. But yeah, just think about some other players here real quick. So I talk about big men, talk about point guards. So I talk about Hardaway, like a Rod Strickland. Yeah, Strickland would be great today. Can you imagine the kind of behind the back stuff passes that Strickland would have been doing today? Because even back then, when he was with they were the Bullets then, I mean, it was non-stop fast breaking with them. Then I just talk about Hardaway. You have Chris Mullen, so like your 3-point shooters. Miller. Mullen was Mullen was a sharpshooter, but you know, he could up fake, take that step inside the line and shoot that. Chris Mullen's another guy. I wonder how well he's remembered. Because when he was on the Warriors, yeah, he was nasty. Trying to think some other guys. Another point guard, Kevin Johnson. Another guy, loved watching playing. Maybe I really wanted to be a point guard. I don't know. Like, I never could be. Because like I said, I was always one of the taller players on the team. So, never got the chance to do it, but I think in the back of my mind, I liked watching point guard play back then. Then, there were a couple of names I thought about that I kind of wished played today just to see what they would have looked like. And then kind of the similar build. Grant Hill and Penny Hardaway. Two guys, great players back then. Both guys, had their career kind of derailed because of injuries. Grant Hill, we all know, well, if you don't know, Grant Hill basically destroyed his career because he played on a broken foot for the Pistons in the playoffs. I think he played like one game in the series, and there was some kind of miscommunication or something with the doctors, and he tried to play on it in the second game, couldn't really do it, and then from that moment on, he constantly had foot, ankle injuries. So, and then Hardaway, what was it with him? Was it back injuries with Hardaway? But guys like, Hill, Hardaway, even McGrady. Did McGrady play in the midnight? No, I think Grady was 2000s. But like Hill and Hardaway, those are two guys I would have loved to see play today's game. More wide open. The lane just open for them to break down their guy, get to the rim. Two more guys I like to watch in the play. So ultimately, I kind of did that exercise just to show that I guess I don't know. I don't know. I wasn't in KG's head, so I don't know what he may have been thinking when he said it. Because I'm assuming he was going off of the pace of the game today, the love of the three-point shot. And in the 90s, three-point shot wasn't as used as it is today. But I don't think that means that players back then couldn't handle today's game. Not at all. One, some players would have adapted. And then two, some players from the 90s, maybe they would have changed how the game is played today, which I guess you have to think about that as well. Because you mean to tell me that, like I just said, Grant Hill and Penny Hardaway, if they play today, like coaches would force them to be three-point shooters? No. You let them do what they do. Now, for them, you would probably surround them on a team of like a couple of shooters, and Penny was a point guard. Grant Hill was more of a small forward. So for Grant Hill's case, you'd probably want to get him a point guard that could give him the ball in the wing, and then at that point, get out of his way, let him do work. So yeah. I think we can kind of wrap this one at this point, but KG's my guy. I guess the final story. So since, like I said, was a big guy, I always played like power forward or center. So the two guys I tried to model, I guess, my game after were Kevin Garnett and Chris Webber. Well, Garnett only because he was, big rebound guy, block shots, and then he would make plays off the dribble as a big man. So I, tried doing that. Webber would just get out and run, and like Webber on those, Webber on the Bullets was good, but I really watched Webber once he got to he was on the Warriors too. But once he got to the Kings and he played with like Jason Williams and them, that's when I really started paying attention to Chris Webber. So yeah, guys like that would have easily have made the transition to today's game, no problem. So like I said, I think with KG, if he had named some players, maybe it would make it easier to figure out where he's coming from. And as I said, if you're going to make a statement like that, especially as a guy of KG's skill level, he had to be talking about guys he either played with, but I don't think he would do that. It had to be guys he played against that he thinks would struggle today. Yeah, so. Oh wait, well I can't get off this episode without talking about some of my Celtics guys, of course. Pierce could play today. I'm trying to think who Paul Pierce would be if he played today. I mean, who's to say like Paul Pierce couldn't be? I was gonna say DeMar DeRozan, but yeah, these player comps I'd have to think about more. But Pierce would be, because Pierce was a small forward who could post up, played kind of in the high post. And plus, we saw him play into the early part of this era as well. And he was a pretty good isolation player. So because of that, I think he would work today. And he's an average defender. Usually kind of stepped his game up when he had to in playoffs and all that kind of stuff. So Pierce, I would love to see Pierce on. I mean, of course, the chances of Pierce playing with like Tatum and Brown would have been slim, but actually, I mean, he'd probably be more Jaylen Brown of today. Although Jaylen Brown's way more athletic than Paul Pierce is. But Antoine Walker. Now he's the guy that, let's take a couple seconds here. He might be one that I don't know. Because even back then, he had so many different like evolutions of his game. Like when he was first drafted, he was a guy who was quicker than was quicker than most forwards. I think he was a power forward. And he was quicker than basically every power forward back then. So he took a lot of them off the dribble and went to the hoop. But then as he got, I guess, older in the league, and his body changed a little bit and he got a little bigger, he started developing a three-point shot. And anybody who watched Celtics basketball back then would know there were games that Antoine Walker would frustrate you because he would literally just sit out there and just shoot 3 after 3. And he would shoot deeper threes. He'd airball some, he'd brick others, but then he'd manage to like hit a big one when you needed it. So I think he's a guy who might frustrate. He'd probably frustrate a lot of coaches today, but yeah, I think he would play today. So I guess I say all of that to just say that I feel like your point guards of the 90s would be fine today. So I'm talking about like Kidd, Nash, Hardaway, Strickland, guys like that, they'd be fine today. The ones who big time playmakers off the dribble, yeah. A lot of your two guards, it's like Reggie Miller, MJ. I guess another point guard I didn't even talk about, Gary Payton, yeah, would work today. But Reggie Miller, Jordan, I can't think of another a two guard right now? I completely blanked. So basically, and then small forwards, like I said, Grant Hill, Paul Pierce's. Oh yeah, Vince Carter. I forgot about Vince Carter. Vince Carter was a 90s guy. He just stuck around so long that I didn't think about him because even at the end of his career, he was still pretty effective today's game. So he clearly works. But yeah, so basically need more context out of KG. And like I said, I'm not going to sit here and compare I'm not going to call them bums, of course, but when he said that, I automatically just thought about stars on teams. So, like if you're going to look at the Pistons, I would look at Isaiah Thomas. I wouldn't necessarily look at Bill Laimbeer. So that's the way I went about it. And yeah, so I think your big name players from back then would have easily transitioned to today. I don't know if maybe I should do an episode on today's players back then. How would they hold up? I may save that. So, I mean, I know this episode's kind of all over the place, but I mean, yeah, I just kind of wanted to talk about it for a little bit because when KG said it, it did make me think. So, I guess I wanted to bring to you guys what was in my head and just throw it out there for you so that way you can let me know what you think. Do you agree with me? Think I'm crazy? Let me know. You can do that on Twitter at Chompin Podcast, or drop a comment wherever you're listening to this episode. You could do that there as well, and then have a little back and forth interaction. But if you're new here, hopefully like this episode, and you can subscribe, or like I said, follow on Twitter. Well, actually, subscribe first, then follow on Twitter, and go back and check out some of my other episodes. And then looking ahead, I'm going to do, like I said, the Jordan LeBron talk. I'm going to do that, and that's mainly because. So when Brady won that Super Bowl, automatically there's the whole talk about GOAT talk, but they're crossing sports. So because of that, it made me think, let me go ahead and do the Jordan LeBron thing. And then probably another episode I'll do, I guess, Brady versus Jordan and LeBron, because apparently that was a comparison made. Then I'm doing an episode off of that because Serena Williams was down at the Australian Open. She lost to Osaka and then had that press conference where she kind of left some questions about her future and whether she might retire or... I mean, I could see her doing a maybe reduced schedule, but I think the question was brought up, how come she's not brought up in some of the GOAT talk? And I do want to get into that because I think some of that's because, well, I guess I'll say that, but comparing women's sports to men's sports is always I won't say disconnect, but it's always a little bit difficult, so I'll tackle that subject. Also, well, of course, Carson Wentz got traded, so I'll talk about that. There's so much coming up, so you guys definitely need to stay tuned. I know this week, I think the last episode I gave you was Sunday, and it's now Thursday when I'm recording this one. I'm trying not to keep, I think I did this kind of the week before as well. Perfect world, there wouldn't be that big of a gap between episodes. So I will try next week to at least give you doing Sunday maybe like Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, but we'll see. Ultimately, I would like to get to the point where I can do one every day, but with outside stuff, it's kind of hard to do it every day right now. So, but we're getting there. But of course, thank you guys for tuning in. I really do appreciate it. Be safe out there, and God bless, of course. And if you are listening, well, I guess if you have family or you are listening in Texas, definitely think about all you guys with the whole snowstorm and ice and all that stuff. So praying for you guys. But thanks again. Catch you in the next episode. All right.